Welcome to another episode of Translating Technobabble, where we translate trending topics, technical jargon, best practices, and help relate it to how you as an engineering manager or an exec can find value for your team and your organization. I'm Roger Tipping. I lead client success at Briebug, and I'm here with Mike Hartington today, who is a developer advocate at Ionic, has been involved in mobile app development for the last decade or so, and is also an Angular Google developer expert.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk about progressive web apps today, or PWAs. Contained within that name, I think the name itself almost sells it. Like if I hear progressive web app, it sounds like my app is living its best life now. I want to have a progressive web app. How do I know if I already have one or if that's something that even makes sense for my organization?
So the way I kind of look at it is progressive web apps aren't yet a new thing. They're like an evolution of the web apps that we build today, that we've built for the past 5 years or so. They just get new features and capabilities based on, are we doing the right things to provide a fast, secure, and resilient experience so that way the users are going to benefit from it. And if we are, the browser will grant us more longer-lived capabilities. So kind of what you're really asking is, what is a PWA? And is this a new fancy kind of deployment strategy or a new kind of product that I have to make? The short version is no. It's basically taking the same websites and traditional web apps that people go to today and just adding a few capabilities that enhance it for the users. Being able to get installed on a user's device, being able to work in less than ideal network conditions, be it bad Wi-Fi or no Wi-Fi or no internet connection at all, and feeling more like you are part of the device's own apps versus just a website.
So with traditional websites, we often might make assumptions about the conditions, like the user is on a computer, they're using a web browser, and they have a stable internet connection.
They always have like gigabit Wi-Fi or gigabit internet connection that they're going to be able to handle everything that we can throw at them.
So it sounds like with a progressive web app, you can handle conditions that are a lot less favorable, whether it's a slower connection or an intermittent connection, a different type of device like a mobile device or tablet or something like that, and deal with site interaction in a way that fits the scenario in a way that a traditional website might not currently be able to handle.
Yeah, the main kind of policies is that you should be optimizing for worst case situations. I am on a device that came out 5 years ago. It has 3 generations behind kind of processors, limited RAM, so you're not going to get the fastest device. And if you optimize for that and say it is going to be good enough to work on the worst case situation, everyone else kind of benefits, because if you can get something that is passable on a lower end device and then look at the more modern kind of Android and iOS flagship devices, they're going to benefit from that too. And desktop, they're going to benefit from that as well.
Let's get into some of the details about what experiences and features that a progressive web app can handle that maybe a traditional website couldn't, like being able to use it offline, for example.
Yeah. The offline capabilities of it, as you navigate around through your app, there's this thing called a service worker. We can think of a service worker as, the Wizard of Oz. It's behind the curtains. It's just sitting there watching requests go from the app to the network and then getting the response coming back from the network before it goes to the app itself. So a service worker is basically our middle point where any request and data that we're going to get or request, we can intercept those and start to do some pretty awesome stuff. One of the big kind of traditional ones that people think of with service worker is caching. So as I go out to some database to fetch a list of users, I can say, okay, I am making a request to this endpoint. I'm getting the data back. before I send it to the users, my service worker can say, here's a collection of data. Here is the request that was made. Next time the user goes and tries to request that data again, I can be smart and say, oh, that's the same request. Just give me the data that I already have stored and cached locally. So even if you are disconnected, you can still get at least some kind of data back and can have that longer lived experience that makes PWAs pretty compelling.
Can you explain what longer lived experience means?
Yeah, I mean, most times when people think of a website, they're visiting it for two or 3 minutes, maybe just going in there, checking their email or checking some news article, and then they're done. When they go back to it, they have to do a full reload again, get that data back. With progressive web apps, the idea is that I should be able to go away from this site and come back, and the experience and the life of this app has just kept running in the background, and it has stayed up to date without the user needing to manually refresh. So we can use Service Worker to request new data in the background, to cache this old content that we've previously requested, and can keep that app just running instead of having to do, manually refresh, manually go load data. So kind of longer lived in that aspects.
So it sounds like there are a lot of user experience advantages to a progressive web app, especially depending on what device the user is on, what network conditions that they're dealing with, what types of content that you're serving to them, that they're consuming, what the life cycle of that content might be, and then making decisions within our architecture to decide how to properly serve those things to them in a capacity that makes sense for their situation.
Yeah, I try to suggest that people cache as much as possible. If you are going back to the news sample of an app, you are going to be loading up maybe stories once every hour, or it's going to be a repeated pattern that's not going to change pretty often. So caching that content right away is going to be beneficial. But if you are something like a stock app or some kind of app where requests are changing so frequently, it doesn't make sense to give you a cached version. You can look at it as like, okay, well, if I'm caching my app's logic, my apps itself, and then any extra data, what are the things that are not going to need to be cached? So stocks example, we're not going to load up all the data about what are the current values in the market. You can have all that control kind of built right into it.
Yeah, so there's a very real connection to the business intelligence side of what you're offering in your user experience and how you're going to serve information.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely to whatever extent that you want to use this API and cache that content, you have full control over that.
So it sounds like progressive web app is more of an approach than it is like a particular tool set.
Yeah, it's not like you're installing something into your project and then boom, you have a progressive web app. It's really more about how are you building your app? What kind of content are you expecting to share or ship? And what are some of the practices that you are following as you build out your app? Are you following, the kind of quote unquote best practices for your toolkit of choice? Are you making sure that you can load in fast and low network connectivity? One of the really good benefits or good examples of this, the other day I was actually trying to just look at an internal task application where we kind of track all of our different requirements or different things that we need to achieve throughout our sprint. I couldn't do that because the site would basically just direct me to their mobile app, which I'm on the go, I'm on airplane. I don't necessarily have the best network connection.
Sure.
I could have just loaded their website or loaded their PWA and had at least somewhat of a working example without having to go download 300, 200 megabyte app from the App Store. The kind of idea is that users shouldn't have to go through so much work to use my product or to use my site. They should just be able to go to URL, load it up, and it works. And if you are a salesperson or if you're someone just working in a shipping warehouse, you can be able to load that app right up on your device or even on a work device and have all the information and all the functionality that you need right there without having to, okay, now I got to go provision this device. I have to go download this app 500, 600 times, depending on your sales team. It can be easier to say, here's the URL. It's already bookmarked. Load it up.
I think for certain types of applications, it's really obvious how that's useful.
Mm-hmm.
As an engineering manager or an executive, I'm thinking about my application and my organization, and it may not be as obvious. So how would I know if, for example, my organization, our primary application, is very enterprise and it's very internal? Is this still an approach that makes sense for what we're building?
I think it's one of those, it depends, right? The kind of famous answer that any developer will give you on certain situations. What you can look at, though, is take a look at what your app is doing, figure out, is this something that is going to benefit from being able to be installed offline? Is it something that's going to be to benefit from having a fast loading experience? Are we going to expect this app to work on mobile, on the field, or is it always going to be like a corporate kind of Wi-Fi situation? Like they are connected to the network at all times, running on these modern desktop machines. If they're going to be running a modern computer and not loading it up on the mobile device, maybe progressive web apps aren't necessarily something that you need, but I wouldn't necessarily think that they wouldn't like a faster app. There's kind of this idea that it doesn't necessarily need to be all in on progressive web apps. You don't necessarily need to make something installable, but you should be making your app fast. You should be making it secure. These kind of situations where it's like, I like those two aspects of it. I don't necessarily care about offline caching or push notifications or what have you. I want a fast app though, and that's going to be applicable too.
So you can tailor this approach to the benefits that make sense for you and your application.
Yeah.
Without like a wholesale.
Yeah, you pick and choose what features what practices that you want to follow. And really, that's just going to be beneficial for everybody.
Got it. So what kind of impact am I looking at to my team, my organization, our time, our resources for us to learn the approach, adopt the approach, or maybe first analyze the approach and make sure that it makes sense for us?
So, if your team's already following engineering best practices for whatever their toolkit of choice is, they're halfway there. Most frameworks and most libraries that people use these days kind of come out of the box with these best practices already baked in. Angular is a really good use case for this. It gives you all of those things that get you on that happy path of my app's going to be fast, it's going to follow all the best things that I should be doing, and it's going to give me a path to make everything technically a progressive web app. React does the same thing, and all the other frameworks, they all have these good options. So if you're following those best practices and using what your toolkit has to offer, you're already on the right path and already halfway there.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that as this is an approach and it's not a product that we're selling or buying, this is almost becoming an emergent standard for how people will interact with these applications?
Yeah. Like when you think PWA, you don't necessarily think I'm building a product. I'm developing in a mindset, kind of developers work in Agile. They build their apps to be progressive web apps. They are fast. They use new capabilities and can fall back to situations where those capabilities don't work. They are progressive. They are able to work in those situations. They're web apps. They're just, I want to load this on a website. Here you go. And it's going to work no matter what the situation is.
Let's talk about how PWA might be able to offer us more flexibility in how we do deployment.
Yeah, we are at the end of the day building traditionally a website. Like with fancy features and extra capabilities, we're still generating an HTML, CSS, JavaScript project. So for like our initial benefits, we can deploy to hosting providers that we already have. So if you're deploying on good ones, Firebase, Netlify, through AWS, you can deploy to all those different targets and nothing really has changed. So whatever infrastructure that you're already using, you can deploy to there. Where I think the story kind of gets really interesting is where you can look at these wrapper technologies that allow you to take your web app, PWA, and deploy it to the app stores. So a really good example of this is cases where there are APIs that you would like to use or features that you would like to use that don't necessarily exist in the browser at the moment. These wrapper technologies allow you to code or build your app in a way where if that feature is available, use it and use either the native capabilities or the web capabilities. And if it's not available, gracefully fall back to either throwing an error or just, whoops, we can't really do this. We're in a situation where this API or this feature doesn't exist. So those wrapper technologies, you can either do them, I think they're traditionally called hybrid apps. Give you, I think, the best of both worlds where if you still need to be in the store, you can have that option. But also ask, does your PWA need to be in a store? Most of the time, the answer is no. And especially if you are doing something like an internal app, you don't need to have this on the app stores. You can just have that URL and deploy it to your traditional web hosting service and have that still get the benefits of all the progressive web app kind of methodologies.
So I may not need my application to be downloadable directly from the App Store. Mm-hmm. However, it sounds like if we use this wrapper approach in deployment that we might have access to some native features that we wouldn't be able to through a browser.
Definitely.
Like location services, for example, something that's browser capable now, but there are other native features that we may not have access to.
Native file system, Bluetooth connectivity, being able to just load up and read photos from your user's device. Granted, with permissions enabled and everything, but these wrapper technologies give you that capability and still do it in a way that if those features eventually come to the web, I'm not limiting myself to this is only going to work on these native capabilities. I can still target web. They're more just helping me in situations where I want to deploy to a store, but I also want to make sure that when the web catches up, I can do this.
So if you can summarize this for me, our deployment options are something like PWA only, PWA plus native iOS, native Android, or this hybrid app approach that you're talking about.
Yeah, you deploy either as a traditional web app as you are used to doing. You have a progressive web app, and then the native equivalents for iOS and Android, kind of the web app and PWA augments what the native apps are doing. Or you go all in and can have this hybrid app that uses the PWA but then enhances it with native capabilities.
So if I'm an engineering manager or executive and I'm still wondering if this approach makes sense for my specific organization and application, what are the questions that I should be asking myself?
So things I would consider, are my users going to be limited to their access to the internet? Do I want my apps to be installed and work offline? And do I want to take advantage of all the latest native device capabilities that I have available? If any one of those three kind of apply to you, definitely check out Progressive Web Apps. They solve all those situations.
That's awesome. I think that checklist makes it really simple for me to know as an engineering manager, is this an approach that we should take a longer look at?
Yeah, and everything else that is added there and that you hear about, it's supplementary. Yes, fast is important, but those three main features, they really make the value of progressive web apps, that high.
So I think this progressive web app trend is very modern and it's responsive to new needs. People are not consuming the web in the way that they used to be 15, 20 years ago. And if we can use this approach in how we build our applications, then our users will have access to what we build offline in places where they don't have as consistent of an access to a stable connection in other countries. They'll be able to take advantage of existing modern mobile device features that traditional websites cannot, including new features that will continue to emerge as devices improve and users have more needs.
And for the next billion users that are coming online, they'll be able to use our products and be able to take advantage of all those features that we've built into them.
Yeah, that's awesome, Mike. Future-proofing is super important as we're building out our applications. Thanks a lot, Mike, for being here with us today and helping translate this new trend with progressive web applications to all of our engineering managers and executives who need to make important decisions about how their application is going to be architected moving forward. And thank you for being here with us today. We hope that your time was well spent and you gained a lot of insight and value from being with us. Until next time.